And finally, this is it. My new book is out, and yes, the cover right now is upside down. It is made to catch your attention and make you listen more carefully. Now that I have played this very childish game to make you listen, we can talk more about it. So it is called Magical Linguistics, the new language patterns that make people stop and listen to you. The writing of this book started only back in June 2024, and I finished writing it in December, which is a pretty good achievement. I am proud of. Don't laugh at me. I'm very proud of this. At the same time, I was publishing on YouTube. But also when I started writing it, I was not quite sure of what this would be about. I guess I still don't know what it is about, to be honest with you. I guess the reviews will tell me what this book is. I had many directions in mind when I started, more on the therapeutic side, more on the seduction side, because it is where I started, more personal stories, more politics. I was not quite sure, and in the end, I am still proud of the result, but I will tell you more in detail what is in it. So in total, we have 334 pages worth of content. We have 140 plus language patterns included in it, and I will explain in a minute how to use them for maximum benefit. We have about 20 plus conversations broken down exactly like my breakdowns on YouTube, laid out step by step. This conversation works like this when the client heals in therapy, or when the politician tries to outframe his opponent. How does that work step by step on the conversation? Each pattern is laid out, clarified, everything is smooth for your reading. The key in the head on the cover is a good metaphor, in my opinion, for how does that technology works with language, with hypnotic language, with language patterns. You can either open somebody's mind, which is the purpose of a key. You can also lock somebody's mind. And many of the conversations broken down in that book are aimed at showing you how somebody who has been limited by constraining thoughts, by oppressive political beliefs, by whatever, by his past, by his parents, by whoever tried to limit them, how can you, with language, open their mind again, even when it has been locked? And in the other way, we can also find some techniques that can be used to lock somebody in a position. Obviously, I encourage only positive uses of those techniques. I still mention the manipulative tactics to be aware of them and realize when it is being used against you. That being said, about 70%, I would say, of the techniques, breakdowns, everything laid out is really more geared at positive, healthy uses, therapeutic conversations. How can somebody evolve in their life and get more empowered through the way you spoke to them? I think it is the core of the book. The other 20-30% is, as I said, the more manipulative ways of using language, the abuse that there might have been in politics, in religion, in many instances where you talk with a narcissist and they are never going to concede anything they may have done wrong, and how do you defend against that. But literally all the conversations broken down are conversations I had for real in my life with clients, or conversations I heard other people having. So all of it is based on true experimentation, on true concrete experiences. There is not really much theory in it, except in the introduction in chapter 5, where I give some more epistemological take on the material. But for the rest, most of it is really based on concrete language patterns applied in real life, in real conversations. How does that work in the real world and not in theory academically? Now, for the way to use this book properly, I would say there is no really any particular order in which you should read all the chapters. I would still say chapter 1 is essential because it really lays the ground, the foundation for everything else in the book. It really talks about basic belief structures. How do you identify a limiting belief or a positive belief? The most basic rhetorical questions that can help you unveil any limiting belief in the head of somebody who seems stuck, but you don't know how to help that person. And once you have read that one, then you may just jump freely to any other section of the book based on what catches your interest the most. For example, most people I gave the book to so far to get some feedback, they all, literally all of them, jumped on the chapter on hypnotic metaphors and how to create them and how they are used. Everyone jumped on that chapter and loved it, not sure why, even if I knew this would be a big interesting topic because so many people keep asking me about how to create metaphors, about how to make them on the fly. So I knew this chapter would be really compelling. I was just not expecting that everyone would jump on it right away. And at the same time, all the chapters I wrote down, every time I gave exercises for teaching you how to use your inner dialogue to unlock your mind, stuff like that, I was applying all those exercises on myself to check if all the steps were clearly laid out and if nothing was missing. So I wrote the book again like 3 times, reading again all the chapters to change all the parts that may have been unclear in the beginning, to make sure everyone, even somebody who doesn't know anything, can follow the procedures and get their mind more attuned to how those techniques work. As I was doing all of those, as I was completing all the exercises, I realized that chapter 7 on future outcomes to me was definitely the most transformational, because I realized many things even I was still limited by that I'm not anymore. At least I don't feel limited anymore by those things, and they were unconscious at this point when I wrote the book. I became aware of those, and I could change them with the language patterns contained in it. So chapter 7 is the one that had the biggest impact on me, I would say, but everyone is different, so maybe on you it won't have much of an impact, but the chapter on metaframe, for example, chapter 9 on metaframe, will be much more evocative for you depending on your life story. Everyone will find their biggest value in one of the chapters, maybe not the same one for everyone. Everyone can find at least something they can use right away today in their conversations or onto their inner talk to be more confident about what happens to them and into their life. Chapter 6, on a side note, I would say, is the most hardcore reframing, because it is really the one where we dive into the semantics of how linguistically reframing works. And this was the most challenging for me to write down, because even if I can use those things intuitively, I'm not used to teach them at that level of technical specificity. When you take a phrase, a sentence that gets turned into another more positive sentence, what specifically, semantically causes that to happen? And that was a huge challenge for me to break down in my head and to make sure everyone could understand, even somebody who doesn't know anything about NLP or whatever. So it was challenging, but therefore I think this chapter is pretty interesting. Chapter 6 on pure reframing, or the alternative views on that model to be specific. I included many quotes, self-empowering quotes. For example, even if everyone wants to be financially free, no one is truly free from the judgment of other people around them. So the same word is used twice in the same sentence but doesn't have the same meaning and creates a new opening in the mind. Another one was, the biggest enemy or the biggest threat of knowledge is not the lack of knowledge, it is the illusion of knowledge. Or the biggest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge. The same word used twice in the same sentence and it creates some mind-bending effect. Why is that? That is what I wanted to lay out in the book. You also have a chapter on pattern interrupt. Chapter 2 is on pattern interrupt, the soft way by using confusion, and the harsh, provocative way if you really need to get that far. I wanted to put that one early in the book because it is one of the topics you guys have been asking the most. So make sure to understand all of this book is really based on what you guys have been asking the most, based on what worked best on the channel and also in the comments, and also all the questions I was receiving by email. I really made it so that what you're the most interested about comes first, or as close as possible to what you will read first. Then at the end we have 3 added chapters, one on seduction, because as I said, it is where I initially learned all those things. So I'm putting some things about accelerated learning at the same time in this chapter because it relates to how I learned myself. Then a chapter on sales, due to one person who suggested it, and that person will recognize himself when I mentioned this. The chapter on sales was not planned in the beginning, but it was a great add up into all the other techniques. So it is showing how this model can be used in a negotiation situation, negotiation tactics, how can you soften objections if you're getting them. And the last one of the three chapters on applications is on political debates, which on purpose I kept for the end, considering the current political climate, which is very inflammatory. As I said, I really wanted to put both sides of every argument. Whenever I showed one thing that could favor one political party, I made the same thing on the other party to encourage critical thinking instead of dogma in any kind of situation you want to debate that into, and showing with same thing real conversations, how does that work, how one term gets reframed into another one to suit one narrative by the media or whoever is trying to make you fit into a mold you may not fit into. And I did my best to make that as simple as possible, even if this topic can be very complicated. Linguistics is not something you can just learn in one day. I still wanted to make that as comprehensible as possible for everyone who stumbled upon the book, even somebody who has no prior experience. And at the same time, some of the techniques like nested loops in the chapter on pattern interrupt are very advanced and can only be used by people who already have a lot of experience. Nonetheless, I think the whole book can be of interest to you if you decide to purchase it today or very soon. How to use this book? How to use this book specifically? You have 10 language patterns at the end of each chapter. Those 10 language patterns at the end of each chapter are given as a summary of all the techniques mentioned in the corresponding chapter. So at the end of chapter 3, for example, which is more on the meta model, the specific language, at the end you have 10 language patterns that are only using, or as much as possible, only using techniques coming from the meta model, and those patterns are aimed at yourself sometimes they are aimed at being said to somebody else. I didn't make that clear though on purpose. I didn't make it clear which patterns were intended for you and which patterns are intended to say to somebody else, because I wanted to give your unconscious mind the freedom of deciding what applies to you, what does not apply to you. You are free to decide that. All the patterns that you think apply to you, I would encourage you to write the answer to it, either in the book or whatever you want, and notice what kind of changes pop up inside your head as you are writing down the answers, or even just thinking about the answers. So for example, if we take chapter 1, think of the main person who hurt you in the past, the main person who hurt you at some point. If there are still any remaining scars or fears linked to that person, how do you know those scars or memories could still have any negative impact on you today? Moreover, what if they simply no longer had any effect on you? Which new choices would you start considering then? That is one language pattern. Actually, it's a mix of several, but I gave that as one specific pattern, and you have 10 patterns like this at the end of every chapter, all of them using exactly the techniques described and explained in the chapter they are linked with. There is a massive teaching component behind that when you alternate between passive consumption, where you see the breakdowns, you see how somebody else, me or any other person mentioned in the book, uses that language. It is passive consumption, you are consuming the content, and then you alternate with moments of proactive action. You are completing the patterns yourself, you are creating your own sentences by doing something. Then it is mixing the perceptual positions between passive and active doer, which reinforces the bridge between unconscious incompetence and conscious competence. It is made on purpose. This is why I kept that for the end of every chapter. And at the same time, in the middle of each chapter, you will have metaphors, stories, and things implied at your unconscious mind without you knowing, unless you are advanced in NLP and you understand what I'm doing. Otherwise, it might be too confusing. You may not even realize it, but many things are also hidden inside the chapters to make your mind reflect upon new things you may have not considered yet. So this is it. The link is down below to get this book. I am pretty glad the paperback version came out as that good. I was not expecting that. The Kindle version version, the online version, is slightly less good than what I was expecting in terms of the placement of titles, all of that, but still pretty okay. Obviously, I will recommend to get the physical copy because it is a book that I would recommend having by your side and checking into it every time you need some advice from it. So for that matter, I obviously recommend to get a physical copy, even if I know it is not as cheap as the online version. And if you want to order it a physical copy and you are not living in the US, then please connect on your local Amazon website. If you are in Germany, go to amazon.de and check for the book into your local website, because the delivery will be much faster that way than if you order into the US. So you can check that, ask any questions if you would like some more information about the book. And I am glad this adventure is coming to an end. Also a bit sad because it was very stimulating to write all of it. The book was supposed to be much bigger in the beginning. I had to delete several chapters because considering the length of the book at this point, if I had added all the things I wanted to add, it would have been almost twice the size, and I didn't have the time also to write that much. But so many other chapters will be the topic of probably upcoming books in the future, and this one I hope is already a great value into the field of NLP, rhetoric, linguistics, sleight of mouth, all of that. Thanks a lot for your support all along, all the feedback, and all this book exists because of you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had the necessary feedback to know what works and what people want to learn into that field. So thanks to you, obviously, and I hope you will enjoy the book.